Hi, thanks for tuning in today. Today I want to share some thoughts with you on the authorship of the book of Revelation and the Gospel of John. Some liberal scholars have tried to say that the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation were not written by the Apostle John. If they're very liberal, they'll say both books weren't written by the Apostle John. If they're somewhat liberal, they'll say that the book of Revelation wasn't, but maybe the Gospel of John was. And in the 19th century, it would go reverse. Like they would say that the Gospel of John wasn't written by the Apostle John, but the book of Revelation was. So it's sort of all over the map. But the consistent conservative view is that John the Apostle wrote both the book of Revelation and the Gospel of John. Now, having said that, I think it's hard to ignore, whether you're reading it in English or whether you're reading it in Greek, that there are superficial stylistic differences between the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to share with you just something that I think contributes to the idea that the Apostle John wrote the book of Revelation. And I haven't read this in any commentary. I haven't read it in any scholarly journals. And probably if I were in that realm, if I were in that level of academia, if I wrote something like I'm about to share with you, they'd probably try to kick me out of the scholarly guild. I think it's just sort of a fun fact, maybe contributes to it. You can either leave it alone or hold on to it, but I'll share that with you in just a second. But I want to share first with you, I want to say that I really believe that the Apostle John wrote both the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. Now there are like I said, there's these superficial differences, but the deeper I drive into the Gospel of John and the deeper I drive into the book of Revelation and look at the deep structure of those books, how they're structured, and some of the less obvious agreements between the two books, I'm more and more convinced that the Apostle John wrote both books. So while there is a superficial difference between how they're written, and we might be able to attribute that to, the intents of the book are totally different, the setting of the book's totally different, time and place where they're being written, that's different. But some of the structure of the book of Revelation and some of the structure of the Gospel of John, how they're both structured so much around the number 7. Some of the agreements, how John wants to open his gospel and talk about the Logos, and how in Revelation chapter 2 we see Jesus being portrayed as, Revelation chapter 19 rather, Jesus being portrayed as the Word of God. And on we could go about the deep concord between these two books. I think the consistent conservative position is the right position to hold on these, that John the Apostle was the true author of both books. Now, what I find really interesting about this is that there's this so Revelation is, by many accounts, a very difficult book to understand. It's captured the imagination of so many people. But I think one chapter in particular is one of the most interesting and difficult chapters in the whole book of a difficult book. And that is chapter 10 of the book of Revelation. Do you know what the chapter 10 is about in the book of Revelation? It's about these 7 thunders. Now what's interesting is in the book of Daniel is told to seal up the words of the prophecy that he's given. And we presume the reason why he's told to seal it up is because the fulfillment of those words were a long ways off. However, in the last chapter of the book of Revelation, John is told to unseal, keep unsealed the words of these prophecies. Don't the words of this prophecy, because the time is near. There's a near fulfillment of the words that John's being given. So he's not to seal up the words. But in chapter 10, we're told that John hears the voice of the seven thunders. There's this angel, and one foot's on the land, one foot's on the sea, and he hears the seven thunders, and he's told, seal up the words of this prophecy. So everything basically in the book of Revelation is unsealed except chapter 10. And what's ironic about that is that, as far as we know, as far as with explicit clarity, the only human being on earth who knows what exactly the contents of the seven thunders were in explicit detail is the Apostle John. Now, what I think is interesting about this is that Jesus, who isn't limited in the same ways that you and I are limited in, that Jesus, the Son of God, now whether he it's kind of hard to say, because you wonder, am I reading too much into this? But I think it's not an accident that Jesus called James and John the sons of thunder. So during Jesus' earthly ministry, he gives a name to the Apostle John as a son of thunder. And it's interesting that John later becomes exiled on the Isle of Patmos, being named by the Messiah, the Son of God, as a son of thunder. And it's that one that God chooses to give the revelation of the seven thunders to. I think that the Apostle John is the John that wrote the book of Revelation. Now, you might not find that compelling or that interesting, but I just thought it was a neat fact, and I wanted to share it with you tonight, and also to affirm that John, in my opinion, the Apostle John, was the one who wrote both the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. So that's all I have for you tonight. We'll see you next.